Welcome to the Turbo QSA Getting Started series. We appreciate your interest in Turbo QSA, and we are committed to being sure your ramp-up time is well spent. We created Turbo QSA to supercharge your QSA firm's productivity, and we would not want your onboarding experience to be anything less. So here's what we're going to tackle in this first series. You received a logon for our pilot version, so what's next? Editing the details for your QSA company, adding additional QSAs and other types of users, creating a client to be assessed, creating client users and assigning their responsibility areas, creating your first assessment project, navigating the user interface, peer review concepts, outputting your first ROC, getting support from Turbo QSA, and finally, we'll wrap things up. So let's get started. To begin, point your web browser to pilot.turboqsa.com. Okay, so getting started. You should have received your email from Turbo QSA with your login credentials, and in that email would have been a link that you would need to click on in order to establish your password and register the account. So assuming that you've already done that, go ahead and get us logged in here. I've created an account called, I think it's just Get Started, not Getting Started. And as soon as we get in there, we'll have a look around. Alright, when you first log in, you most likely received a screen with an agreement on it that you would need to have read through and check the box that you agreed to those terms and clicked accept. After you do that, you will be on this screen. The first thing you're going to notice is that Turbo QSA strongly recommends enabling two-factor authentication. In order to do that, you would click up here into your profile and go to the Authentication tab and select Google Authenticator or whatever you use, and take a picture of the barcode. You know the drill. And that'll get it to where you're required to put in your second factor before you can log in. The first thing you want to do after you log in is have a look at your company details that we input to the system when we created your pilot account for testing. To do this, you're going to navigate over to the button that says Company. And here you'll see the demo company that created, but in your case, you're going to see your company name, and you can put in a DBA name if you have one. Make sure we got your phone number correct, your address correct, your URL correct. And this right here is who. This will be your account. You'll be the primary client administrator, and we'll talk a bit about that as we move on. So to edit these details, you just hit this icon right here, and you can edit all of the details except the administrator. That is immutable. So if you have an issue with that, obviously, you'll need to reach out to support, and we'll get you fixed up. Once you're satisfied with these values, just click Proceed, and your company details are up to date. The next thing we want to talk about is adding the other users from your QSA company to the software. This is something that as you test the software, or if you're using it with actual customer data in your own installation in the future, it's important that you have at least two QSA users, one that would serve as a lead QSA and the other as a peer reviewer. For obvious reasons, you don't want the same QSA being the peer reviewer. So we're going to walk through the process of adding additional QSA and other types of users to the software. So to get started, you're going to navigate to this button right here called Users, and we're going to select Invite New User. And it's a very simple process. You select a role for that user and you put in their email. So let's walk through these roles and what they mean exactly. Client administrator is who you are currently logged in. You have basically all top level rights to administrate the software in your instance. Project managers have visibility into every project, the progress, the engagement reports, the audit logs, and things of that nature to be able to determine things that they're interested in to keep projects on track. QSAs are the people doing the dirty work. They're the ones in the trenches actually working on these assessment projects. Associate QSAs, which as you know is the newer designation for junior level QSAs that don't quite have the experience to become a full QSA. These folks can pretty much do anything a QSA can, except for they cannot attest to anything. So those fields that say, type the name of the QSA that attests X, they will not be able to perform those functions. That will have to be the lead QSA. They will be listed on the ROC report if they're associated with a particular project. Client, this is when you create client contacts, this is the role that they will assume. It's extremely limited. They will only be able to view controls they're working on and upload evidence that they've been requested to upload evidence to. They, of course, can enter into correspondence and conversations with their QSA at the control level. An auditor role simply is a role that you can assign to somebody to have read-only access to a project. So they won't be able to change anything. They won't be able to enter any details at all. They'll only be able to view data that has already been entered into the system. Client Engagement Manager is a newer role that we created that will allow you to offload some of the work at the beginning of the project to whoever the lead project person is on the client side. So for example, if you have a customer and they have, let's say, 20 personnel in various parts of their organization, from IT to security to compliance to HR to physical security, whatever these things are, database administration, and you're not wanting to enter all these users yourself, you can delegate that activity by setting up a client engagement manager. This can save you a pretty fair amount of time. So first what we're going to do is we're going to enter a couple of QSAs into the system. All right. And I'm just going to make a few up here using my own email address here at TurboQSA. So we're going to say QSA, let's say 10 at TurboQSA.com. And what's going to happen when I click this invite, a link will be emailed to this individual, and they will be able to go in, much like you did when you received your invite to join this pilot instance. They will go in and create a secure password. They will also, since we're not providing any other information about them, be asked to provide their first and last name as well. So that will happen once they click the link in that email. So I'm going to click invite here. All right, and then I'm going to set up one more that is also a QSA. Reason being is I'm going to, in a future video, we're going to assign one of these folks to the role of QSA for a project, and the other one is going to be to the role of peer reviewer for that project. Alright, so we have both of these users invited, and as soon as they respond to their emails, they will be listed right here, associated with your company. Next, we're going to create your first client, one that will be assessed. So in order to do that, you're going to navigate over to the button that says Clients. And we already have one in here, but we're going to create another one. So I'm going to click New Client right here. And we have a few fields we need to fill out. For the client name, let's make up something good. Let's call them Test Customer Dallas. And we'll say that their address is 1234 Anywhere Lane in Dallas. And then here you're going to want to put the primary contact information, the person that's likely going to be signing the attestation. So we'll say Bob Jones is the person that's going to be doing that. His title is Chief Information Security Officer. His phone number is 123-456-7890. And we're going to get Bob an email address, make him one up. So I'll say Bob J at TurboQSA.com. Obviously, you'll want to fill in the details for one of your customers, but I want to reiterate, while you're using the pilot instance, please don't put real customer data into the tool. You do not have the sort of control over the privacy of that data that you will when you are licensed to use an instance in your own environment. So I can't stress that enough. Everything is play while we're in pilot. And so we're going to put we'll just go ahead and put our own URL in here for Test Customer Dallas. So once you've entered that information, you just hit proceed, and that is all there is to it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the client contacts. And as I mentioned earlier, you can create a client administrator and delegate them to perform this task, since obviously they're at this stage of the game far more familiar with who all the stakeholders are in their organization that are going to be a part of the assessment. But it's a good idea for you to know how to do it as well, so you can walk them through the process. Although the Turbo QSA team will be releasing additional training material that you can share with your clients to get them on board with the pieces of the tool that they use during the process. So to get started, we're going to navigate to this button called Contacts. Click that, and you have to select the right client. In this case, we're going to go with the one we just created. We'll click Select, and then we're going to click on Add New Client. And here we need to put in their name, so we're going to say Sally Smith, and her job title is HR Director, and she's in the Human Resources organization. And we'll just leave it Human Resources. And her phone number is also 123-456-7890. And we'll say Sales plus Sally Smith at TurboQSA.com. And we'll give her our URL because we want to make sure you're all intimately familiar with where to find more information about the product. So this next part is a super important aspect that ties into a lot of downstream functionality in Turbo QSA. And that's the concept of responsibility areas. So it's super important. The more granular you get this on the front end, the far more time you're going to save and the far more efficiencies you're going to gain as you work through each of your assessments. So we're going to click Change Responsibility Areas here, and you can see this is the list of responsibility areas that are quite common throughout the process of doing a ROC assessment. So in her case, she's going to fall very squarely under Human Resources and Training Coordination. So we're going to select that. There may be other people that are part of the project that also have that, and that's perfectly fine. But for now, and for the sake of this demonstration, we're going to assign Sally Smith to Human Resources and Training Coordination. So I'm just going to click OK here. It's highly unlikely that Sally would be an ISA, and it's also highly unlikely that Sally's the primary contact for Test Customer Dallas. So we're going to click Submit. So Sally will get an email as well to allow her to set up her password if she so chooses. Even if she doesn't, if interviews are targeted at her because of certain elements in Requirement 12 that want to have an interview with somebody with that responsibility to discuss security awareness training, she's still going to get those emails. She's still going to be able to participate in those interviews. So we'll just add one more because it will help us out as we move forward in later videos. So we'll call this one David Jones, and his title is Database Administrator, and he's in IT organization. His phone number is also the same as Sally's, and we'll say sales plus David J at TurboQSA.com. And once again, we'll share our thing, and again we're going to assign some responsibility areas. So perhaps Test Customer Dallas may not be the largest customer in the world. He may have more than just database type responsibility, so let's figure that out. Certainly he's going to be responsible for database administration or owning of databases, provisioning, managing, maintenance of those company databases. And for the purpose of getting through future training videos, let's say that David is also familiar with and involved in the software development process. So we're going to assign him to that as well. All right, and he's not an ISA either, and we'll click Submit. Let's just do one more. We'll say William Branch, and he is a IT admin. He's in IT. His number is the same. And we're going to say TurboQSA.com and same URL. And for his responsibility, he's going to have a little bit more going on. So we're going to say that he's responsible for antivirus, and he is also responsible for user account management, since he adds new users, maintains those users, things of that nature. And we'll also say that he takes care of patch installation and management. Alright, let's go ahead. He's not an ISA either. And one more, let's add a primary guy. So I believe the guy's name was Bob Smith, and his title was CISO, IT, Yeah, let's go with IT for that. Doesn't truly matter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And alright. Oops, not that one. We'll go with this one. And let's say that Bob is squarely responsible for information security management. He has some involvement with incident response, and perhaps we'll just say that's about it. So, and he's not an ISA, but he is primary, so we're going to hit submit, and we'll just go with that. So now we have a fair cross-section of users. I'm sure many of your customers are going to have far more than this, and I can't stress enough, the more granular you can get on the stakeholders, and particularly their assigned responsibility areas, the better you're going to be able to intelligently manage interviews, evidence requests, and other things in a tool that is going to drastically improve your productivity. Okay, with all of that done, it's finally time to set up our first ROC assessment project. So in order to do that, we're going to click the obvious button under the projects section here. We're going to click New Project, and we're going to name this Test Dallas ROC 2021. And we need to select the customer that belongs to, which is going to be Test Customer Dallas. Here we would identify if this is a merchant or service provider, or shared hosting provider, or any combination of the above. For the purpose of this training series, we're going to go with merchant. And we will click Create. And at this point, this is where we add payment channels. And this is a vital part of Turbo QSA that helps you be sure that you provide a response that's relevant to each payment channel defined for a particular project. Oftentimes, I found in my QSA work that if a customer had more than one payment channel going, that when I would review ROCs, I would see where maybe the QSA responded relevant information for one of the payment channels, but maybe not another one in certain controls, and that would usually cause churn as I went back to find out, if this process really was identical in a website payment channel as it might have been in a retail store payment channel. Often the answer was no. Sometimes the testing hadn't been done. But Turbo QSA, by strictly enforcing the concept of payment channels, will be sure that those kinds of things don't get missed. So to add payment channels, we're going to click the plus button. And as you can see, there's these three types that you're familiar with from reviewing ROCs. And of course, you can add a custom one as well. But in this case, we're going to do two payment channels. A card present, which is going to be retail stores, and an e-commerce. So we're just going to click that one, and we're going to click that one, and then we'll click close. And now we need to provide a little bit of information. So for the e-commerce, we're going to describe that as a website selling tools. How about that? And this is an interesting and very time-saving feature that we have incorporated into the software. If you have done enough due diligence to determine that this e-commerce site is doing a full redirect or an iframe type scenario where the payment pages are absolutely confirmed not to be hosted on that customer's web server, and that they have zero interaction with the payment card data at all, then you can make a judgment call that you're most likely going to treat this with the same sort of requirements that a SAC A would be treated with. That's a significant reduction in the number of requirements that are going to be applicable to this e-commerce. So let's go ahead and assume that they do have a full redirect, and we're going to and what I want to explain here is when about 75% of the rest of the rock will become not applicable based on the fact that we're using the requirements that would be typically seen in a SAC-A. Are you locked into that? No. You can unfilter that and add any other requirements into the project that you see fit as a QSA. But for the 75% in this case that are going to be deemed not applicable, you can provide a default not applicable response, which will be automatically placed in that 75% of those controls regarding this payment channel. So some QSAs simply write not applicable. Others will give a little bit more detail. So as the bank or the card brands read the rock, they will have a better idea of why that you're assuming this is not applicable. So in this case, we're going to say not applicable test customer Dallas does a verified full redirect to Stripe. All right, Stripe is a pretty common payment processor these days that handle full redirects. All right, so that's all we have to do to define the e-commerce channel. Now let's talk about the face-to-face channel. That generally means retail stores. So let's say that test customer Dallas has 150 retail stores located in 14 cities in the USA. Okay. And as is seen quite a bit more commonly these days for a variety of reasons, not the least of which security, many of these retail customers are using point-to-point encryption systems. Some of them are validated, some of them have NISAs, some of them are not at all, and maybe you're going to have a conversation with a bank. But for the purpose of this demonstration, let's assume that they are using a validated point-to-point encryption solution that you have confirmed is listed on the pci-scc website as such. So in that case, we're going to select P2PE, and again, for this payment channel, about 80% of the requirements are going to be knocked off. And this is going to save us a significant amount of time. We too can provide a default not applicable reason for this payment channel, and we're going to say not applicable test customer Dallas has a validated P2PE solution in place. And as you can see, I like to hold down my shift key when I don't need to. So now I've defined both of these payment channels, and the only thing I need to do is hit save. At this point, the new project is created. Now that we have a project created, it's time to talk about navigating the TurboQSA user interface. So it's very intuitive. It's going to come very naturally to you, particularly as you get into the rock and the various sections of filling out the rock. That's all going to seem extremely familiar to you. There's not a lot to learn there. We've already talked through the projects button, the company button, the clients button, the contacts button, the user button. We will talk a little bit about reports here in a few minutes, and the audit log is an area that we'll discuss briefly during the wrap-up. So the support button is another section of the series that we'll get into shortly, and this is where you can change information about the logged in user. This icon right here, if you see a badge, with example with a number, that's going to indicate that you've either received a message from your administrator for Turbo QSA, or that there's a message from Turbo QSA itself, usually indicating that an update's available if you choose to install it. So the bulk of the user interface is contained inside the project, which I just clicked on. These are your typical summary, executive summary sections of the ROC, sections 1 through 5. Section 6, which also contains the 3 Appendix A1 through A3, are found here. Appendix B and D are purely informational. They're printed in the ROC, every ROC. And then Appendix C contains your compensating control worksheets, which you're going to see is all handled for you. You never need to do anything in Appendix C, regardless of how many compensating controls you do or do not create. So the very first thing you're going to want to do once you've created a project is you're going to want to manage who's participating in it from your company's side. To do that, you're going to click this button, Manage Participants, and as you can see, these are the QSAs that we had created for this test company. So we're going to go ahead and assume that John QSA, or that email address you might remember, sales+QSA10@turboqsa.com, is going to be the lead QSA for this project. So I'm going to check him as the lead, and I'm going to assign him as such, and you will see he now has a badge saying he's the lead QSA. This next one, Steve, we're going to say he's going to be the reviewer in this project, the peer reviewer. So we're going to assign him as such. If you had associate QSAs, you can assign them. If you wanted to assign another QSA to this particular project, for whatever reason, you may do that at this time too. But there can only be one lead and there can only be one reviewer associated with any project, because on the ROC report itself, there's only space for one lead and one peer reviewer. So that's what one of the very first things you need to do after you've created a project. So from there, let's click this back arrow and keep talking about this. This button right here is what is ultimately going to create the ROC report in the PCI approved template. This right here, if you've gone through and assessed a customer and there's a number of things that are not in place, or issues like that you feel like you need to give them a gap report that they can work from to prepare themselves for the assessment. If you click this, sorry, I clicked the wrong button, but if you click this Generate Remediation list, it will produce an Excel worksheet with the gaps and allow the customers to track as they work through closing those gaps before you actually come back and be sure that everything's in place. Okay. The evidence button, since we have no evidence, there's nothing to see here, but if we did, all evidence that's been uploaded would be visible here. Would also allow you to archive that evidence as well. And the responsibility areas, since we have defined contacts for this customer and we've assigned some responsibility areas, when we push this button, we're going to get a really nice opportunity here to blanket request responses to the controls that this gentleman is responsible for, having to do with database administration and owners. And additionally, and we can look at any evidence he's brought forth. We can also go ahead and schedule interviews related to those types of controls right now. And the same is true for these other areas. Now, if we had the contacts in this particular project across the spectrum of responsibility areas, we'd be able to knock out a lot of these information requests on day one and really be able to move the needle as that information starts coming in. Because as these contacts, these stakeholders on the customer side start uploading that evidence, it's being attached to the correct requirements. So there's nothing for you really to do except for go review it and be sure that everything looks good there. Okay. You may be wondering why there's no button for requirement or around antivirus configuration and management. I'm sure you're familiar with SAC-A and SAC P2PE type assessments, that there is nothing in requirement 5 or requirement 1 for that matter to keep up with. So that's the reason why those have no buttons there. All right, so that's a little bit about navigating that responsibility area section. Filtering, let's talk through this briefly. This gives you a powerful way to decide what is going to be shown in section 6, right? You can basically go for a time span of changes, a from and through date, to basically get a period of time that you want to look at something that's happened. You can also say, I want to filter on item status where nothing's been done, where a control's waiting on a customer, where an interview's scheduled, where you're waiting on a QSA. So if the customer's put something in a control, like uploaded some evidence, that's going to be changed to waiting for QSA. If you want to log in the morning and see what you have waiting for you, you can click this filter right here and it will take you right to those elements for you to review. If you're the peer reviewer, you're likely going to want to log in and click on this and see what's available to be reviewed. And if you're the QSA and the peer reviewer has requested some changes based on what he has seen in the work, you might want to filter on this and see if there's something you need to refigure for him. And then any controls that are approved, basically finished controls, the evidence is there, they've been peer reviewed, everything's good. If you want to see all the items that are finished, you can filter on approved. Additional things that you can do with filtering is filter by evidence area. So if you want to just filter on controls that require evidence on any of these responsibility areas, you can do so here. And same with interviews. If you want to filter on any interview type controls on these responsibility areas, you would set that there. And then if you want to filter on only items that have outstanding response requests, you can do so here. If you want to filter on any correspondence areas that are targeted at you, you can do so here. And then non-compliant items. If something's marked non-compliant, you can filter on it here. And then this is enabled by default because we defined payment channels that were based on SACs. That doesn't mean we're doing a SAC, we're doing a ROC. But since those payment channels were basically the same sort of controls that would appear in a SAC-A or the same sort of controls that would appear in a SAC P2PE, we're going to significantly reduce the amount of controls we need to deal with for this assessment. So I'm going to leave everything the same and we're going to go in. So that's filtering. This is our search box. This is a really powerful thing. I can search by requirement number, keywords, or even items that are in these sections here. So for example, if I search 4.6, there's going to be more than one thing found here. There's going to be a requirement 4.6, and there's also going to be something in the details about the reviewed environment around sampling. So in this case, because 4.6, there is nothing in scope for 4.6 for this type of rock. Nothing was shown. Had I unchecked the filtering, it would have been. But in this case, as you can see, this is the sample sets for reporting. I was taken directly there. There will be something under 9.9.1. That requirement has to do with physical device maintenance for P2PE type devices or PIN transaction devices. So that took me directly to that part of the rock. In fact, that exact control. Okay. So there's a lot of good things that you can do with the filtering. But to give you an example, if I type in 2.1 and hit enter, in this case, there's two things. There's something in the executive summary, description of the entity's payment card business. There's also a control related that is marked 2.1 that's in scope for this assessment. So first we'll just jump over since this was about the next place we're going anyway. This is all going to look very familiar to you. Turbo QSA cannot do this sort of work for you. This is where you're describing the nature of the entity's business and how they store, process, transmit card data, and so on. You're going to want to input this information, and as you do, it's going to be set for peer review. And we're going to talk more about peer review in just a little bit, but let's just put a response in here. This is, boy, I'm bad at this. This is just a test. All right. So you'll see it's saving automatically. There's nothing that I need to do. And because I've input that there, it's now changed this workflow to ready for peer review. Okay. So again, we're going to talk more about that. But if you click on this button right here, this is the workflow button. Everything that happens in this control or in this section or whatever the field is going to be captured here. There's going to be a log of it. You're going to see everything that's happened, whether it's typing in text or in other controls, uploading evidence or conducting interviews or whatever it is. Or even if I decide I want to go back and say it's a pretty lousy test. It's going to resave that, and you're going to see this increments to 2, ready for peer review. So now everything here, I've added a response. It's still ready for peer review. So we're ready to go with that. So let's go back here and have a quick look through these items again. There's a couple of things I want to point out. I'm not going to go through every one of these because we would be here for several hours. But in the contact information, there's really nothing for you to do here. By defining the customer, by defining the project, most of this information is already filled out for you. There's nothing for you to do. Okay? Additionally, inside of here, I want to point this out because I've noticed a couple of customers that are demoing the product have thought they needed to do something here. They really don't. Summary of findings. This is going to be automatically populated for you as you complete the various requirements inside the rock. Okay, as those are completed and peer reviewed, this is calculated for you, and there's the same logic behind how they're set that you would set. If every control is compliant or a combination of compliant and not applicable, then it's going to be marked as compliant. If every control is, if there's even one control that's not compliant, it's going to be not compliant. And if every control is not applicable, it's not applicable. And if there's any controls that are not tested, that will be marked as well. As additionally, the appendix about not tested controls will be tracked for you. So you do not need to come in and set these. There's no point in it. It's going to happen for you automatically. But it will allow you to do it if you don't agree with our logic. And if you don't agree with our logic, please put in a support ticket and let's talk about it. All right? Perfect. So the other thing I want to point out real quickly while we're in here, I don't want this video to get too long, but details about the reviewed environment. There's several areas here that are going to save you a lot of time. Section 4.6, for example, sample sets for reporting. You can either define those here by clicking the plus symbol, or as you're going through controls, the ones that require samples have the ability for you to add that sample in line. And furthermore, that sample will automatically be added here, and that sample will be available on any other control for you to select it if you so choose. So that's really powerful. You do not need to deal with section 4.6 itself. It's going to get handled automatically so long as you're inputting samples at the control level. Okay, so then let's talk about another one here in section 4. A couple more actually. Documentation reviewed. As your customers add documents to controls or you add documents to controls, they're going to be populated here for you automatically. There's nothing you need to do with this section at all. You know, this was one of those things where I used to have to go back when I'm doing rocks and either, you know, go look at, maybe if I was really good at it, I was keeping up with them as I went. That's usually how I should do it, or keeping up with it in a spreadsheet. But you do not need to do that. As you input documentation into the system, it will be kept up with here. Same with individuals interviewed. As you schedule interviews or add people on during an interview, those folks will be tracked here. There's nothing for you to do. And same with these in place with compensating controls and disclosures for not tested. If you mark any control not tested, it's going to be tracked here. If you do a compensating control worksheet, which is handled inline, super easy to do, we'll walk through that briefly. There's nothing for you to do. These are tracked for you. So I just wanted to point that out. So that said, let's very briefly wrap this part of the video up by getting into findings and observations. So again, we looked briefly at this a moment ago, but let's just pick one. And for the fun of it, let's go right for requirement 2.1, which has to do with changing vendor supplied defaults or removing or disabling unnecessary default accounts. You're free to do things the way you want to do things. I typically will test the items that require testing before I decide if it's in place or not. But in this case, because I want to first demonstrate the compensating control worksheet for you, I'm going to say that this is in place with compensating control. And as you can see, my compensating control worksheet has popped right up on the screen. And I'm just going to put in some fictitious blah, blah, blah information to make this fast. And this will automatically be added to that appendix as well as tracked for this particular control. Okay. So now it's the disclosure summary is shown here so you know what's gone on. It's in place with a compensating control. You can... If you have tested these, I think it's most people want to put in what they found that required the compensating control. You can do it however you want to do it. So moving forward, let's take a look at one more because I want to walk through sort of the information that is available in a typical control that you need to be aware of. Okay. So again, this is your workflows, right? Anytime you change anything here, anytime you change anything here or anywhere else, the workflows are going to track that, and you want it to because it makes life extremely easy. So for this one, let's do an example here. This is one where you're asked to identify the documented policies and procedures that you examined. Okay, when you see a requirement like that, you're also going to come across this little clipboard icon that wants you to add evidence. Now, had you used the feature early on to request evidence from your customer, whoever's responsible for this particular control would have received a request and a link that they could have securely used to upload this evidence and attach it to this requirement. But let's, for the moment, assume you're going to handle it yourself. Okay, I'm going to click that. There's really only one payment channel in scope for PIN transaction devices in this particular ROC, and that's card present. I'm going to go ahead and add a file, which is going to be we're just going to, for the case of this, we're going to say it's in the information security document. We're going to describe. We only have to describe this once since it's the first time we uploaded it. Information security. Except for I can't spell. And we're going to say it's on page 52. Okay. And then the date of the document, which as you know is required in a ROC, we'll say this document is dated June 2nd, 2021, and it is the second version of the document. You verified all this. But now on future evidence requests, like the next one, if it was in this same document, you would just need to select this particular document and then mention what page it's on. You wouldn't need to do anything else. But in this, the next one would be something different. That would be the inventory. All right, so this is here, and as you can see, it's now ready for peer review. You could add an additional document if you want, but while we're here, let's talk about what these buttons do. I've already mentioned the workflow. You can see that we added evidence, and at some point, when it's peer reviewed, somebody's going to approve that evidence or not. You could also type in something here if you wanted that would go to the peer reviewer. Hey, I know this evidence is a little light. Need guidance. Whatever. And you could change the status if you wanted. You could also decide whether or not you want your customer to see this. I'm going to say, because of what I've typed, I don't really think my customer needs to see this. I'm just going to leave the status the way it is, and I'm going to submit this. Okay? So, as you can see, this is only going to be not seen by the customer, so it's going to be seen by the peer reviewer or anybody else that works for your QSA company. And they'll have that. So, that's the workflow button. Most of it's automatically handled. You don't need to deal with it. This button right here is Lookup. Now, let's assume that in 2022, you're going to do a ROC for test company Dallas or whatever we named them, and you would like to be able to maybe look back at the 2021 ROC to see how you answered certain questions or where you found certain items in the evidence. This can really speed things up. So in this case, if you perform their 2021 ROC, there's really two things you can do. You can actually clone it, and I'm not saying that that's always a great idea, but it can be a good starting point. Obviously, you're supposed to retest your controls, change your samples up. I'm not going to lecture you on how to be a good QSA, but you can clone it, and we'll walk through that in a later video series. But you can also look it up. So if you click this button, if there was a ROC from last year, which there's not, you would be directed to this same the response that was for this particular control, and you could copy it and bring it over if you want. Or you could just be refreshed on exactly what your thinking was last year for this. So that's pretty powerful. We've already walked through what this button is. If I wanted to add another one, I'd simply click it again. Now let's talk about what hints mean. Oftentimes, in some cases, there's sort of boilerplate language in certain controls, or at least certain QSA companies may like to answer controls in certain ways, or maybe QSAs have come up with a good answer that is typically used for certain types of controls. Some of the more ambiguous ones in requirement 1 around security features, for example. You can input hints, and once they're approved by the client administrator, they will appear to be used for any ROC for any customer if you so choose. A hint can be an example of a response. It can also just be a better explanation of the testing procedure and the requirement. So it can be anything. Further, if you've decided, that this particular testing procedure for this control is not really required, for whatever reason, this button right here will mark this particular testing procedure as not applicable, and it will lock it to further activity. This will require a peer review as well. Your peer reviewer may or may not agree with your assessment of that. So that's what these buttons do inside of here. Next, I want to talk about the interview screen. This is one of my favorite parts. Actually, before we do that, let's talk about samples. I had mentioned section 4.6. You could have either entered them in that part of the ROC, or in this case, identify the sample of devices from the list selected for this testing procedure. So if we had uploaded a list of devices, which we could do, but there's no real need for the sake of this demo, they may have, if it's I think we said they had 100 and some odd stores in 14 states, 150 stores, 14 states, and every store probably has maybe 4 registers to 10. So, do the math. It's a lot. They could have, 600, 800 devices. Obviously, you're not going to go look at all of those. It would be physically impossible.
So we're going to define a sample. There's no sample set's been defined for this project, so I'm going to hit this plus symbol. I'm going to name it a reference, PTS01, and P2PE devices. Oh, goodness. And then I'm going to add some items. So in this case, they have two types of PIN transaction devices that are in use for this validated P2PE solution. So PTS device 1 is a Verifone MX915, and there is we sampled maybe 40 out of 400 of those, and then we'll say in some of their newer stores we found that they have some of the big MX925s. MX925, and in this case they don't have as many, so we'll say we looked at 20 out of 200. Not telling you how to do sampling. That's a decision you get to make. All right. So now we've defined our sample set for this one. And as you can see, it's here, and it will be available in any other control that wants a sample set. And if that sample set happens to do with PIN transaction devices, you can just use the same sample, or you can define a new one. Your choice. All right. So this belongs to the card present channel. You'll notice that's the only one that was available. It has nothing to do with a e-commerce site. And in order to use it, I'm going to select it right here. And now that is available. I've identified the sample for this particular control. All right. I could also just manually enter in some, a sample myself if I don't want to use sampling, which is typically, not required, although strongly encouraged, and with Turbo QSA, a lot easier to do. All right. So with that sample set inside, let's take a look at the interview section. This is one of the most powerful parts of the Turbo QSA software. So right here, interview personnel to verify the list of devices updated when they're added, relocated, decommissioned, etc. So I'm going to click anywhere where you see this person icon means it's an interview type control. I'm going to click that, and this brings up this interview screen, which was the last button that we needed to cover. Okay, and it says the requirement is 9.9.1.c. In this case, we're going to say we're going on site, and we're going to do this tomorrow morning. It happens to be September 16th here in my location. We're going to do this tomorrow morning. And it's going to come from me. I'm still logged in as Get Started here, but if I was logged in as one of those QSAs, it would come from me. And these are the areas of responsibility that are required. Now, we don't have any current attendees, and there's only one guy that's going to cover part of this. We didn't define anybody for physical access control. So in order to, we would probably have to write somebody in, or go do some more contacts. But let's go ahead and see what we get. So as I mentioned, Bob Smith, he's got, he covers 50% of this. That's definitely a good start. Let's add him in. All right. So none of these other guys seem to have anything to do with this particular control. So we're going to go with Bob. Now, we have an interview ready to save. We could put, if it was a Zoom meeting, we could put the Zoom meeting or whatever you use. We could put that information here. And before we save it, though, let's say, man, I really don't want to waste a lot of Bob's time. I'm probably going to need, he's a CISO. I guarantee you I'm going to need him on some other requirements. Let's see what else we could tackle while we have Bob's attention on the 17th at 9 in the morning. I'm going to click this button called right below the report items, and look, we have two requirements that are 100% related to Bob. So let's go ahead and knock those out while we're at it. Perfect. And I could, if I wanted to, I could tag him to some of these other ones too. It's sort of up to you. How many requirements you think you can do in whatever period of time you've got Bob tied down. You can make those decisions. What you're going to find out is when you have more contacts and you have these responsibility areas fully assigned out, you're going to really be able to gain some major efficiencies here. But in the meantime, I went from one requirement that I needed to deal with to fully utilizing Bob's time to tackle everything that he's responsible for fully in his role. So that sounds good to me. Here, I can keep my notes for the meeting when it occurs. I'm going to go ahead and save this interview. And we're going to be taken back to the control. And as you can see, we have a scheduled interview, which I can click on and go back to that screen. If I decide, man, Bob's not enough, and there's this, he told me I needed to bring in somebody that's not even in the contact list, probably better do it. So I'm going to say her name is Susan Wilson, and give her an email, sales plus Susan W at turbo.com. Number 1234560, and we'll say she's in this case physical security. All right, perfect. So she will get added to the persons interviewed with the right fields, which these are all required in the ROC, as soon as I hit the save button. So she's now in the interview as well. And I can add as many write-ins as I want. I can also do that from the interview invitation screen as well. All right, so that's that pretty much gets us through the typical things you're going to see in the user interface. Peer reviews. Let's talk about it. So I logged out as the user I was in during that last rather long video, and I promise you this one won't be anywhere near as long, nor will any of the remaining videos. So we're getting close, I promise. Hang in there with me. But I logged in as the guy that we designated as the peer reviewer for this project, okay? And we're going to talk about peer review concepts here. Typically oftentimes peer reviews are sort of something that occurs at the tail end of the project, and it usually loads down one of your QSAs for at least a solid day, if not more, to, depending on how big the ROC is, to read every single word of that ROC and dive deep and understand the concepts that are being reported on from the testing in that ROC, and that's a pretty heavy lift. And it also opens the door to a lot of inaccuracy. The recommended way and you don't have to do it this way, but the way that we recommend you go about it using Turbo QSA is to keep up with it on at least a weekly basis, maybe on a daily basis. This will allow your peer reviewer to get more embedded with the project and the particulars of it, the technology of it, the data flows of it, and it'll give them a better ability to sort of understand when something may not be quite at the necessary level on the reporting for a particular control. So let's talk about it. I'm logged in as the person that we designated as the peer reviewer. I can see that I have 4 items ready for peer review. The other thing is, if I keep up with this on a daily or weekly basis, I don't have any heavy lift at the end. Everything's peer reviewed. You may want to QA it at the end, and that's an optional process. But in terms of peer reviewing, the job is done, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. So I'm going to click in here, and it's like, where do I start? I got all this stuff. It's ready for peer review. I think the first thing I'm going to do is let's see what they're looking at, in here, the summary overview. What could possibly be ready for here? We have one description, payment card business. What is it? Oh, this is just a test. That's a pretty lousy test. Well, to be honest with you, I'm not thrilled with what I'm reading here, and I'm going to kick this back to the QSA. This really does not describe the nature of our customer's business. Please update ASAP. All right. When I do that, it's going to go back. It's going to be changes requested. So your QSA, as I mentioned in the navigation video, should periodically, I recommend on a daily basis, start his day by filtering on changes requested and seeing what the peer reviewer has left for him to do. Okay. So this one went from ready for peer review to changes requested. When that QSA goes in and puts something a little more meaningful here, then it will go again to ready for peer review. And that process will repeat until things are correct. The same exact mechanisms work, for everywhere in the ROC that would require a peer review. Okay. If I go into here, now, as you can see, there's all this stuff. I'm like, man, this is too much. I don't want to go digging for these things. That's why I use filtering. I'm just going to filter. I'm the peer reviewer. That's all I'm interested in. Oh, okay. I got 2 items here that are ready for peer review that he did yesterday. Let's see what they're all about. And, okay, here's one of them. It's in place with a compensating control. I probably want to take a look at that. Pretty lousy compensating control. So I'm probably going to say, you have to call me about this CCW. Maybe it's just too much to write down. It was a pretty bad CCW. I've rejected this one. I've requested a change on it. I'm sorry, but I didn't like that compensating control. But at this point, now I've only got one left to do today. Let's have a look at that, see what they put together for me. Looks like they've got some documentation. If I want to read that documentation, I can download it right here and have a look at it. And I should. And I'm going to go right to page 52 and be sure that this policy just requires that I maintain a list of devices and so on. So let's assume that I've done that. I'm going to say, yep, this looks just fine. I'm going to click this. At that point, this one's approved. It's done. It's off the radar. Nothing left to be done by anybody. So those are the peer review concepts. Please reach out if you have any questions about that or any suggestions about, further ways that we could go about streamlining that process for you. But we really like the way this works and feel like it is a definite productivity enhancer for a part of the process that has traditionally been arduous, to say the least, to get through. All right, so next we're going to talk about most of our customers' favorite part of the tool, generating your ROC report. I know every one of you watching this right now are going to sorely miss having to use the PCI Council's ROC template to create your work product for your customer. I know I deeply miss it. So anyway, I'm being a little facetious here. Let's click into this project. I know it's not complete yet, but it doesn't have to be complete. You can generate these reports at any time. It really doesn't make any difference. They don't all have to be peer reviewed, anything along the lines. I simply click this button right here and out. You won't be able to see this because it's going to, unless the screen recording caught it, I'm not sure. But it's done. It literally takes about 5 seconds and the ROC is finished. Obtaining support in Turbo QSA is easy and accessible. There's a number of ways you can go about getting it. On the last slide of the video, there's several contact methods for us. But anytime you're in the application, there's a button up here that says support. And if you click on it, you can upload screenshots or other files or whatever you need to that will give us more information. The more information you can provide here, the better. And it also tells you our support email address that you can always send anything to that you want. And if for some reason or another this form doesn't give you enough fields, or whatever reason you want to send us an email, feel free. It actually winds up in the same queue as submitting this form. So that's the main thing I wanted to highlight here, is the ease at which you can get support. If you go one step further and decide to install Turbo QSA in your own environment, you will be given a personal Discord channel that gives you direct access to our support technicians, and in some cases our developers, for more complicated problems if they arise. So just a few odds and ends to wrap things up here. I appreciate you sticking with me for this video series. Hopefully it's been informative and allowed you to quickly get ramped up and able to use and evaluate the system. As I had promised earlier on, I wanted to discuss these last two buttons here. The reports button is a mechanism. Currently we have one report there, but more will be coming. Oftentimes your customers and maybe your project managers would like to have a status report on a daily or a weekly basis, and I know for one, as a QSA, that could be sort of a mundane part of every day or every week where I'd have to go back, figure out maybe I'm working more than one project. I have to go back in each of those projects and gather the things that occurred and put together some sort of a formatted report, usually in an email or whatever, for my customer and my manager that would, detail the progress for that period of time. The status report, if you click this and pick which project you're working on, in this case, Test Dallas, and in a period. So if it's a weekly report, it's going to set it automatically if you're doing this on, Friday, and Friday happens to be this date, which it's not. But in this case, it defaults to 1 week worth of time. If you want it to be just for the day, you can change these dates any way you want. And when you click that button, these are the items that are done. Now, nothing was really done in this particular rock, so it's not showing a lot of progress. It is showing that 3 items were changed. 1 was actually completed. We did not send any requests. We did receive a couple of responses, which were uploaded evidences. Responses that I put in. We also created 3 interviews, and then if we run this again tomorrow, because those are scheduled for tomorrow, you would see that those interviews occurred. So you can simply copy this information, format it however you want, put it in an email. So that's one time-saving feature for your QSAs that they'll appreciate, especially if they have more than one project going. But even not, this keeps rock-solid track of what's going on. The next thing I wanted to highlight, sort of the last thing I wanted to highlight in this series, is the audit logs. This is not something you're going to use on a daily basis. Maybe you don't use it in certain projects at all. But if you have a project that gets bogged down, maybe you have a control that's gone back and forth 5 or 6 times with a customer and they just don't seem to get it. They're providing the wrong information, or maybe you getting suspicious that it's not really in place and they're just hoping that they strike a chord with you and you give up and mark it in place, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, it's costing a lot of time and effort in a particular control or controls that you think is impacting the ability of this project to succeed, or whatever. The audit log is going to provide a bulletproof log of everything that's gone on in this particular project between this period of time and this period of time. And when you run it, you're going to see everything that's occurred, okay, including any messages that were added, the type of response, who did it, what requirement we were dealing with, or what section of the rock we were dealing with. Everything. And you might see on a particular requirement that it's gone back and forth, several times, and you're needing to have a difficult conversation. Oftentimes project managers are going to need to have a difficult conversation with a customer. Maybe they got to ask for more money, more time to accomplish the project because it's become bogged down over, 1 or more control items.
this will be invaluable data for them to provide in those conversations. So that's the primary reason why we added the audit log, and that's why I wanted to highlight it. So that's really about it for wrapping things up. I encourage you to poke around in the application, expose your other QSAs to it. If you have any ideas, please forward them to us either through the support channel up above that we just discussed, or shoot us an email at support@turboqsa.com. And that's, and we will certainly examine all those. We may want to jump on a quick call with you to be sure we understand your needs completely. Well, this concludes this video series on getting ramped up with TurboQSA in our pilot environment. We appreciate the time that you've spent with us today, and we certainly look forward to continuing our conversations with you as you explore the product. Please take note of these contact sources on the screen, and know that you're welcome to reach out to us at any time if you have questions or concerns or ideas for feature enhancements or literally anything else. We welcome the conversation, and again, we appreciate you taking this time out of your day to accelerate your knowledge of the product, and we look forward to working with you in the future.